Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Let's see, are we good? You'd think I was technical or something. I don't know. Thank you. It's great to be back with you guys. I don't know that I need this slide, but my name is Ben Barber. I'm the president and CEO of Innovonics in Felton, California. And Innovonics does 3 different product lines. And when Ron talked to me about coming out this year and doing a talk, I had it on my desire to do something on audio processing, and Ron said, "Oh, I want you to do it on RDS." And I said, "Okay, well, that's fine, that's good, we can do it both." The reason I wanted to do it on audio processing was about a year ago, my in-laws live in Northern California. And so I go and visit them like a good son-in-law, and there's a Calvary Chapel there in town, and they have a radio station. And every time I'd go, it sounded so weak, so like, come on, guys, get it together. Let's do this. I found out they actually have one of our products in there, an audio processor. And so I contacted them and said, hey, can I come by? I come up every, few months or something, usually on a weekend. Can I come by and just help you set it up and take a look at it? And I tried to get a hold of him over and over and over. And finally, I connected with the guy, and he's a worship pastor, and he just kind of inherited the radio station and didn't have a real good feel for how to make things work and how to make it sound really good. So I met him on a Sunday afternoon and looked at some things, connected some things differently, set up some levels, and we went out to his car, and he was just like, wow, that's amazing, this sounds so good on the dial. And just as he's tuning across the dial, he's just blown away. And so I thought, maybe there's a need for just a real quick tutorial on what is audio processing. And Josh did something yesterday on audio processing where he talked about strips and things like that and how to record your pastor. And that's very different than on-air audio processing. So what I'm going to talk about is on-air audio processing, and it's just real simple. So purpose of broadcast audio processing. Number 1 purpose is to protect against transmitter overmodulation. So your transmitter has a speed limit. It's not the power, but it's how much modulation you can do. And the FCC says you can go 100%, which is like 65 miles an hour in your car. And so the number 1 reason or purpose for audio processing is so that you don't go over that limit. Secondary and equally important function is to bring consistency to the program material without introducing sonic effects that lessen listeners' enjoyment. That's a quote from Jim Wood, the founder of Innovonics. So number 1 is to make sure you're not speeding, and number 2 is to make it sound good so that listeners can hear it, enjoy it, and they're not driven away by it sounding bad. That's number 2 for audio processing. The reason. You can do a lot of things with audio processing. So we're going to, I can't see that very well, can you? We're just going to go through our most basic audio processor because it's simplified. There are audio processors that you can pay tons of money for that have every single control that you can adjust, and you need a PhD to adjust them. So we're not going to go there. But this is a simple block diagram of a processor that we make, and it's a multi-band processor. Something else that people ask me when they say, "Oh, what do you do?" I say, "Well, I'm president and CEO of Innovonics," and they say, "Oh, what does Innovonics do?" And I say, "Well, we make audio processors, we do monitoring equipment, speedometers for your station, and we do RDS." And they say, "Oh, what is audio processing?" And so I describe it this way. I say, okay, say you're listening to classical music, and the orchestra drops down, and there's just this little, woodwind section going on there. What do? You reach over and you turn up the volume, right? All right, and then pretty soon, here comes in the whole orchestra, and what do? You reach down, turn down the volume. So that's what our box does. It sits there and turns up and down the volume to give you a more consistent level. Now, that's a single band audio processor, and that's what Mitch is doing back there. You know, if somebody comes up and speaks and they're very loud, you know, he rides the fader down just a little bit, or if somebody comes up and they talk pretty quietly, then, you know, he might run the fader up a little bit just to give you a more consistent level. Well, then you can get into what we call multi-band audio processing. And that's where instead of just having a single volume control, you have a bass and a mid-range and a treble control. And so when somebody hits the cajon, you know, boom, and it you know, really puts out a big thump, instead of turning down the entire volume, you just want to turn down the bass real quick so that it doesn't overmodulate, but also so that the whole program material doesn't sit there and pump or suck or duck or all these other audio terms that are very nebulous. Or somebody hits a crash cymbal and, you know, the whole audio goes down if you have only one control. But if you have multi-band controls, 3 bands or more, a bass, a mid, and a treble, then you can turn down the treble real quick when that cymbal crash hits, and you're still only going 65 miles an hour, but it doesn't suck everything down. So that's what multi-band processing is. So we're going to take a look through this, just a real simplified diagram. You've got some inputs, either analog inputs or digital input. You usually have some kind of switching in there so that the processor can pick which inputs it's using. And then it goes right into what's called a gated AGC. AGC is the first stage normally on a processor, and it stands for automatic gain control. And that's what the guys back at the soundboard are doing. They're just riding a fader. You know, you'll have, in a live sound especially, you'd have somebody that's speaking loudly, you know, you back them down a little bit because the volume in the room is at the right spot. Or you have somebody that speaks quietly, you ride the fader up a little bit, or different cuts on a song are recorded at different levels. So that's what AGC does. The gated part, if you go quiet, you don't want the volume control to just start turning up and turning up and turning up and keep on going, because it's just going to bring background noise up, air conditioner noise, whatever kind of noise or ambiance in the room is happening. And then when the speaker comes back on, it's going to duck down real quick. So what you do is you have what's called a gate on it. So if there's no volume, the fader or the volume control just, you know, it stays in the same place or moves really, really slowly back to some resting point. And then when there is energy, volume, program material, then the AGC can move a little bit more quickly. So that's what gated AGC does. The next block in a simplified audio processor is a syllabic leveler. I can't even say that. But this is very important for speech and for when you have preaching programs, that it's a faster AGC, but it works more on speech. Because as I'm speaking, I'm taking breaths, I'm having vocalized pauses, especially as you preach, you do that. You take a pause for emphasis. And so what you don't want to happen is you don't want all the gains to go up, release really quickly, because they're going back to what they think they should be normally. When there's a pause, it's like, oh, it's quiet, I need to bring that up. So a syllabic leveler is very good for speech. If you turn this control up on music, it makes very, very little difference to the sound and processing. The next section is, in this processor, is a 4-section parametric equalizer. So an equalizer is just like a fancy tone control. So you can add a little bit more bass, low end, make the highs a little bit brighter. You can adjust for, if you're only a speaking station, you might use shape the curve, the equalization curve, so that you're getting more mid-range, vocal ranges through there. If you have a talking station, you're not trying to excite a subwoofer. So there's a lot of energy there. Let's just cut that out. You don't need anything. You don't need frequency response down to 20 hertz. And you definitely don't need a bump at 20 hertz to, make it thump, unless you're rapping your sermons or something like that. So you have AGC, a syllabic leveler, 4-section parametric equalization, And then you go into a multi-band compressor on this unit. And what it does is the audio comes in, they're on the left, and then it gets broken out into basically, if you just think about it as treble, mid, and bass controls. And so those three controls interact, they can interact with one another, or they can be very independent. So again, so if you get the thump of a kick drum, the bass compressor is going to regulate that level without affecting the mid-band or the high frequencies. Same thing if you have a cymbal crash, the high band compressor is going to start to work and lower that level so you don't go over your speed limit. Another thing about compressors are a ratio. So in audio you have something called dBs, decibels, and it's just a measure of volume. And so a compressor with a 2-to-1 ratio, if I say something at a 0 level, and then I say something at a minus 20 dB level, 20 dB down, which is quite a bit quieter, what the compressor is going to do is it's going to take that dynamic range of 0 to minus 20, and if it's set for 2-to-1, it's going to give you a range from 0 to minus 10. So or a 10 dB range. It's not really 0, but it's going to compress the range. And you want that, especially with speech, because speech is very all over the place and level. And so you want compression. It's going to give you a little bit better sound, especially for vocals, if you do some compression. The last thing on this block diagram is a special bass effects section, and that's even below the bass control, and that's really meant for driving a subwoofer or a bass punch or something like that. So that reacts specifically to kick drums and things like that. That you want that punch. Going from there, so we've got the AGC, we've got Slavic leveler, we've got EQ, then we have multiband compression. And then coming out of that, it comes into a program density processing, a look-ahead limiter, peak limiter, and then pre-emphasis protection, which all this means is these sections keep you driving at 65 miles an hour. So if you didn't have a limiter and you just had compression, you might have that 10 dB of range that I was talking about. Instead of 20 dB, you'd have 10 dB. So you'd have this range of 10 miles an hour that you're driving in. Well, that's fine. If you're on the freeway, you don't want that 10 mile an hour range to be from 35 to 45. You want that 10 mile an hour range to be from 55 to 65, or maybe even from 60 to 65. You want to squeeze that down, and you want to keep it up at the maximum speed limit. So that's what this limiting does. It takes that dynamic range that you have and moves it right up so that the top of it is hitting 100% modulation, or your 65 miles an hour. FM broadcast, we won't really talk about it much, but there's something called pre-emphasis. Every transmitter pre-emphasizes, it boosts the highs. Every radio rolls off the highs. This is a compounding or companding system to lessen noise. That's the purpose of it. So this section just gives you your peak, if that's all you remember. Then from there, some of you guys are doing stereo, some of you are not, but you go into a stereo decoder and then usually into a D to A, and you come out the composite output right here, and that goes into your transmitter. And if that looks like Greek to you guys, well, you guys probably know Greek, but I don't know Greek. That's a summing amplifier. Don't worry about it. It just conditions the signal and makes it on a BNC connector, one cable that can go off to your transmitter. And so everything's ready to go into your transmitter. The other part of this is that it has an RDS encoder in it, this simple audio processor. So we talked about that the other day. You want to be able to use that. So this is what it looks like. It's real small, compact, very easy to use. It's not big buck processor. It doesn't have millions of controls. So it's very simple to use and operate. We're going to listen to an audio clip here. Pastor Matt Valencia is my pastor in Santa Cruz. This was a couple of weeks ago. He was speaking, and he was talking about David and his sin with Bathsheba from 2 Samuel. And he was going into the whole part where David thought he got away with it. And he didn't get away with it. But it was a great clip, and you can see here that the audio is recorded. It's very low, right about here. This is about 30 seconds, and we're going to listen to it a number of times. So right about here, he laughs. And then you can see this huge spike that is an S, and it picks up in his microphone, and that's what we hear. So let's see, I think we can hear that. Oops. Do we have volume, guys? What's that? I am clicking it there. That's playing up here. I can see it counting off. Oh, this is not good. You know what? Technical difficulty. I'm going to cancel that and restart it. I think that's okay. This is not good. Let's see if we can we'll be right back after this commercial break. How's that? Yeah, please stand by. Something is not. I'm getting an error that it says it can't play the media, so I'm going to restart things.
Can we ask a question? Are you waiting for?
Yes.
So, I was wondering. So the limiter. It says a look-ahead limiter. I was under the impression that limiters they look. What's the difference between a look-ahead limiter and then one that doesn't, or do they all look ahead, or it's a different looking ahead?
I'm sorry. A look-ahead limiter, what happens is when you have a very fast transient spike, like that S on there, and it happens really quick, there's something called an attack and release and a decay and all these other settings that you can set up in a processor. And so if your attack is not fast enough, yeah, it's going to ask for login. If your attack is not fast enough, your limiter is not going to be able to react quick. And what's going to happen on that spike is it's just going to get chopped off. And that's going to sound like distortion.
So not all limiters are created equal.
Not all are created equal, no. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
This is
Just trying to pass the time. Work through the white space. We've got another question, so why don't you go ahead and...
Well, I'll explain the look-ahead limiter a little bit better once I figure out why this isn't working. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate this. You
I don't
guys
want to
are
distract
amazing.
you.
You guys are amazing.
Can I ask a quick
Yes.
question? This is not extremely technical, but I want to ask about the form factor of that piece of equipment that you had on the screen. Is it an 18
It's a half rack.
Half rack?
So,
Are there ears that can be attached to put it into a rack?
yeah, a 19-inch
shelf.
rack is your normal rack, and this unit is a half rack. And we make a
Extension
shelf unit to hold it
Oh, the shelf.
in place.
Okay.
And
That was a simple one. That's a white space question.
okay, so we've got that sound. You know what? I'm going to restart this once the...
So I've got another question, but I'm going to direct this to Rob Taylor,
Okay.
or unless you question available?
Yeah.
Just so that you're the special bass aspect of the multiband. So what frequencies is that controlling?
In our processor, it's going to be down around 30, 40
I think
hertz.
about how many,
Something like that. Oh, that's working. Yes.
When it
Thank
comes
you,
to
guys. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, yeah, the special bass is going to be down 30, 40 hertz, something like that. It's low frequency.
Generating, or is it just down there? Is it looking ahead, looking at what's above that and adding more in if it's missing?
It's not, on this one, I don't know if it's doing like second harmonic and then, yeah, taking that. I don't remember if we do it that way in this processor. But it's a bass enhancement is what it's meant to really, when you've got frequencies down there, it's really meant to thump,
You
so.
know a different processor does that?
Yes, yeah.
I think about how many times when it comes, I think about how many times when it,
Perfect.
Thanks,
That's
Jerry.
good. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Yeah. A look-ahead limiter. I'm sorry, let's get back to that real quick. What a look-ahead limiter does is it introduces a small amount of delay, and so it sees where that level is going, and if that level is going too high, too fast, it actually starts turning it down before it gets there. So it looks ahead and limits the audio so that it still is a nice waveform. It still sounds nice instead of just hitting some threshold and just getting chopped. Because that's, when you do that, you clip, and clipping is distortion. So clipping's not always bad. I mean, electric guitars clip all the time and we think, wow, that's great. But on vocals, on single instruments, things like that, you don't want clipping. It sounds bad. Okay, here's the audio clip from Pastor Matt. And
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, you're still playing that game. You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
all right, so you heard when he said, right after his laugh, the volume got really loud, right? Okay, this is what Matt and Josh would love to have sent to them, and so that they can post-process that, clean that up, and get those levels set up right. So, but that's typical speech. That's what happens. That little spike there is probably 300 or 400% higher than that laugh. So you've got to be able to control those levels, because on the air you can't just increase the level like you can in here. It just gets louder.
I think about
Okay. So.
think about how many times.
Okay, this is a modulation monitor that we make. This is just a front panel picture of it. And this is basically your speedometer for your transmitter. If you guys don't have a modulation monitor, it's a great product to have. But most transmitters have some indication on them, either LEDs or an LCD or something like that, that says this is 100%, or it might actually say 75 kilohertz here, but in the US we go by 100%. So just think that 100% is your maximum speed limit, 65 miles an hour, and you're not supposed to drive over that. So we're going to listen to that same clip going through with no processing, and we're going to see what you're going to see is you're going to see the levels are very low. They're not up here near zero, but they're down. This is minus 10 right now. And you're going to see that these levels are bouncing back and forth quite a bit, more than you want. And you're going to see that we peg the meter. And just like on the highway, if you're going over 65, you get a ticket. And the FCC will be happy to come by and give you a ticket if you're going over the speed limit. So
Think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, you're still playing that game. You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
So that's what that clip looks like without any processing. And you can see that you're grossly overmodulating your transmitter, which is very bad. Now we're going to look at, or we're going to listen to the clip again. And this time we have peak limiting turned on, which is just one of the functions in an audio processor. But it's going to keep our peaks right at, or it's going to keep our peaks from going over 100%. We're not doing any other processing to keep our level. Remember I talked about going, 45 to 50 or 35 to 40, that little 5 mile an hour range. It's not going to keep us up from 60 to 65, but it's going to keep us from going over 65.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids.
Oop.
I think about
There we go.
how many
Okay.
times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it?
It holds
just
it right there
oh,
at
you're
100.
Still playing that game.
So.
You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
So there you can see that the audio is still very low for most of the clip, but it keeps you from going over 100%. So that's the very beginning. That's where that's the starting point. Next, we're going to add in AGC. So we're going to add in some automatic gain control, which is going to bring the level up a little bit, not substantially, but some. And we'll listen to that. So this is the web interface, and this control right here is AGC. You can see that the AGC is going negative just a little bit. And when AGC goes down to minus 15, what it means is that the level coming in is too loud, and it's actually turning the volume down 15 dB. If you see an AGC meter going up in the positive direction, that means the level's too low, and it's actually turning the volume up. And that's okay. You're going to have that thing moving back and forth and wandering all the time. But you want it to be around zero with normal program material, whatever that is. So now we're going to listen to it again.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, you're still playing that game. You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
All right, so if you watched that top meter, you saw that you saw the meter lit up more than you did on the previous clip, because the AGC was bringing up the volume of that clip. I use this raw clip, and it's probably not ideal. I mean, it should probably be produced like Matt would do and give you already a better sounding clip, but it's still got a lot of dynamics, and so I thought I'd use it. So the next thing we're going to add in is this leveling control, and this will actually increase the volume of the voice. You'll hear this.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, you're still playing that game. You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
Now, you perceptive people are going to hear there at the end, the volume is increasing. And that's because the AGC is coming up. And it's kind of catching up, and it's bringing things up. Yes. So what you want to do is, that's why you want to have your sermons processed and produced, because it's going to give you a much more balanced signal going into the processor. We're asking the processor to do what's done in post-production and over the air right now. So that's, I'm glad you guys heard that. I know some of you did. I know Rob did. Okay, the next section in our audio processor is our equalization, our EQ. We want to make a slight boost to the presence frequencies, which is about 100 to 3K, maybe 300 hertz to 3K, depending upon if it's a male or a female voice. Right now, in this one, we just have a boost right down here. It looks like about 90 hertz, about 5 dB, and then we roll off above 10K. So we'll listen to this clip, and it'll sound, you'll hear a tonal difference.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, you're still playing that game. You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
All right. So that's what EQ does. It just tailors things. It can make your station have a unique signature sound on the air. But you want to use EQ sparingly. So the next section is multiband processor. And that's where we're going to get into our low, mid, and highs. And so we add bass punch. We added 1 dB here. We actually moved these, the low, mid, basically our bass, treble, or bass, mid-range, and treble controls. We moved them off 0. In audio processing, and I want to encourage you guys to play with this a little bit. Be careful. Always save what you've done so that you can go back. But it's a good idea to play with it and listen over a day and say, is this sounding the way I want it to sound? But you can make changes in your audio processor and make things sound better. You can also make them sound very bad. So be careful, but definitely experiment. So we'll have some multiband processing here. Also, you'll notice that the average levels are increased. So we're going to get much more LED action in here, more higher modulation. So
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, you're still playing that game. You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
So if you watch the meter that time, let's see. You watched the meter that time, you saw when he has a pause, obviously the meter is going to fall off the bottom. But when he's speaking, the entire time he's speaking, his modulation is up on the display, and you can see it. And that's because of the compression. So now we're going to go ahead and turn on limiting. And something in just about any audio processor, at least in ours, and I think it's probably pretty true in other processors, if you turn a control to the right or up, it's going to get more dense, louder. It just makes sense. So you turn something to the right, it gets louder. So where we started out with all these controls, was back here down, back near 0, or in this case, -10, or wherever they were. They were all backed off. So as the progression of slides has gone along, we've been increasing things. And you'll notice that it does get louder. We'll do a comparison at the end. So on this one, we'll see nice tight control and lots of action up around 65 miles an hour.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, you're still playing that game. You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
All right, so that's with the processor turned up. Now, can you go too far? Okay, I set everything to max, and you guys tell me if this is too far.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong.
Okay, that's too much, all right? And it sounds bad. It's just compressed. I mean, you're just squishing it to death, and you're bringing noise levels up and everything else. So you don't want to be there. When you go to the eye doctor and you put your head in that machine, and what do? They click a little thing and they go A or B, A or B. Well, we're going to give you an A or B situation here. So because we snuck up on it gradually, it's like, okay, you know, maybe I heard some things, maybe I didn't hear some things, but this is before, just with peak limiting. So we're not overmodulating at all.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess.
Okay, and now this is a preset called Thunder Talk.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess.
So that sounds nice, but the peak level of your transmitter has not changed. I mean, you're still hitting 65, but instead of, you know, driving around 40 and then occasionally hitting 65, you're driving between 60 and 65 consistently. And that sounds louder because the average level of everything is brought up. Not the peak level, but the average level. So we'll do that just one more time.
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you
Yeah,
know one
unique
of your
naming,
kids
huh?
has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like...
Okay. And then
I think about how many times when it comes to raising kids, when you know one of your kids has done something wrong and you're waiting for them to confess, and the longer that they try to deceive you, what happens to the wrath? It kicks up a notch, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, you're still playing that game. You think I don't know, but I know. And the amount of time that goes by not only causes consequences to grow, but you know what else it does? It could self-deceive us into thinking we got away with it.
all right, so those are our contrasts, A or B, A or B. And anytime you're setting up an audio processor, that's what you want to do. You want to make an adjustment, save it, and then listen to it for a while, and then go back to the other one, and then listen to it, and then back and forth. That's always comparison. So when you're setting up an audio processor, if you have on your station mixed programming, so you have music and speech, you might want to set it up a little bit differently. But basically, when you're doing music processing, you can use a little bit more compression and a little bit more limiting. You can have a brighter EQ sound, so a little bit of boost to the highs. And you want to have the multiband processor set up so that it's very independent, so that it can catch that cymbal crash or that kick drum and do the limiting or the compression for those different bands. And then you want to have some clipping. And you think, oh, clipping, you know, that's bad. But a little bit of clipping with music isn't so bad because music is very full range. It's got all the frequencies in it usually. And if you have clipping products, there's something else there to mask them. So you can use a little bit of clipping, always use it cautiously. If you're doing speech, you want to have more leveling. You want to have medium compression and light limiting. You don't want speech to always be just in your face, pounding out. I mean, you guys, of course you do. You guys speak professionally, every week you speak, and you always use dynamic range for emphasis or pause, or you get louder and softer. So you want to keep that dynamic range, but you don't want so much dynamic range that the person on the radio just listening to the radio just went, what did he say? The truck came by and I couldn't hear, something like that. So you want to have processing, but you don't want to have so much, but you don't want to have so little that you can't hear the message. So medium compression, light limiting, presence EQ. I'd set the EQ more for the vocal ranges rather than for a subwoofer or something like that. You can do, if you're doing speech, you can do single band processing. You can tie the bass, mid, and treble controls more or less, kind of keep them working together. And what that does is it gives you a very smooth sound. And then very light clipping. You don't want to clip voice. Clipped voice sounds harsh. So what do? You just got your audio processor, you just went back to your station and you said, wow, I really want to try what Ben said. I think, I get this block diagram a little bit. I'm going to try a few things. The best thing to do is to start with a preset. And you pick one and you listen to it for a few minutes and you go, does that sound the way I want it to sound? And if it does, that's great. If it doesn't, move on to the next one. The way we have our presets ordered is basically from light to the most processing. So you can see Thunder Talk is in there. It's just beyond smooth jazz. Classical stations, smooth jazz stations do very, very little processing. A lot of dynamic range. But when you're doing voice, and especially for listeners in a car, you want to do some voice processing, because as that truck drives past, you don't want it to, what did he just say? So there's another aspect of audio processing, and it's called day parting. And so if you're an all-talk station, then you're probably not going to you wouldn't do this. But if you play music half the day or overnight or something like that, what you can do is something called day parting. And you come up with a preset. This could be one of the factory presets. This could be, the jazz setting or the country setting. And it doesn't mean you have to play country music. We were talking last night, you have your processor set on country, and it kills you. It doesn't mean you're playing country music. It just means that's a processor setting called country. All right. But you can also set up the processor and save your own presets, is my point here. So I set this one up. I called it Easy Overnight. And what happens as at 12 a.m. on Sunday and Saturday, this processor setting clicks in. And so overnight, you have a different processor setting for maybe a music, easy listening or beautiful music, or does anybody play beautiful music anymore? Elevator music? All right. Then you've got maybe a morning drive time or something like that. You want to pump up things, so you call the preset morning drive. You set it for 5 a.m. Monday through Friday. It clicks in. And so every weekday morning, your processing changes. So this has a very accurate clock in it. It gets its time from the internet, but it also has an internal clock that's always being sunk. So it's very accurate. So if you set it for 5 o'clock a.m., it will go ahead and change at 5 a.m. Make sure to turn on your RDS. So if your processor, a lot of processors have RDS encoders built into them. A lot of transmitters have it built in. If you're not doing dynamic, okay, that's fine. At least do static. So turn your RDS on. Tom asked me this morning about modulation and what you sacrifice. So I'll just go over that real quick again. With RDS, you put in between 5 and 7% usually for your injection level. So let's just pick 6. That makes sense. So you set your adjustment so that you're 6% on your modulation monitor. You can see that your RDS signal's there. When you do that, the FCC allows you to overmodulate by half of what you just injected. So if you are injecting your RDS level at 6%, you can overmodulate 3% legally. So you can set your transmitter then so it's going to 103%. So technically, you are losing 3% of your audio modulation, not signal strength, not power or anything like that, but your audio levels are going to be down 3%. You say, what's 3%? 3% is nothing. Trust me. 3%, you won't be able to hear it. So it's very, very little. If you are a stereo station, you're already giving 9 or 10% away to your pilot, your stereo pilot. So just by going mono, you can increase, the sound level will increase 10%, and you can hear 10%. But 3%, not sure if you can hear 3%. Can you hear 3%? No, okay. All right, so that was Tom's question, so, yeah. Any other questions?
I just want to make a comment. First of all, great demo. Okay, and I have nothing negative to say. We are in a very, I'm going to call it sterile, excellent listening environment. So if anybody had any questions about the way you process it and said, well, I don't know, maybe it sounds a little too heavy, and I don't think it does. Let's consider listening to this in a car, in a noisy environment, or a small speaker on, let's say, a clock radio. I'm
Yes.
sure it sounds great. So I just wanted to make that comment in case you're listening and go, man, I don't really like the processed sound. Let's think about, this is a very brand new, expensive system we're listening on. This is not a normal listening environment. That's my only comment I wanted to make if anyone had any negative comments about what you did.
No, thank you. This box, you can connect your computer up through the internet. So if you've got, you can go out to your car in the parking lot, you can sit there with your computer in front of you, you can make all sorts of adjustments. I recommend not listening on a system like this for tuning your processor. Sit in your car. That is where you listen probably most of the day. That's where most of your listeners are listening, and that is a great environment to tune your processing.
We couldn't get straight unless we went into the car.
Yeah.
You could sit there in a transmitter site, you can't get it here.
No.
You cannot get it unless you're in the car. It's the only way to
Right.
get the station sound.
Yeah. And most people don't have $1,000 speakers sitting, in their front room, and that's not where they're listening anyway. They're not just going to sit there. They're listening in their car, and who knows what they have. They might have, who knows what they might have. Everything, yeah. A number of years ago, Innovonics at the NAB show, which is a big show in Las Vegas, we would actually bring a car into our booth, and that was our listening room, because it was a great place to be. It was quiet in the car, better than the show floor. And you'd get in there with engineers or program directors, and you would just go through and make adjustments, and they'd say, oh, I'd like a little bit more low end. Okay, well, this is how you do it. And we'd actually do processor demos that way. We used the car in the hall. Yes?
So can you talk a little bit about loudness in general, in case anybody's unfamiliar? And then if you can comment on how much you should or can push it, density and loudness, relative to or depending on the market you're in, if there's a lot of loud stations next to you.
Okay, loudness. Loudness doesn't have anything to do with 100% modulation, other than when somebody says something is loud, it means that meter is just sitting there at 100% all the time, all right? And so it doesn't have so much to do with peak level, it has more to do with the average level, what's happening most of the time, and bringing the average level up. The way you get loudness is more compression and more limiting. And the more you do those things, the more fatiguing it's going to sound, the more just, oh man, it just sounds like noise if you do too much of that. Some markets, you may want to be louder than other markets, just because if you tune across the dial, you don't want somebody to get to your station and go, oh, I need to turn the volume up. Oh, this sounds wimpy. It just, it's lost. You don't want that. So you might want to run it a little bit louder. But Loudness wars were something that program directors really get into, where they're listening to the competition all the time and they're listening to the same songs that they're very familiar with. And they go, oh, their sounds, so much more punchy, and it's just got this extra edge of bass, and what are they doing for processing? We've got to buy one of their processors and do it, or hire somebody to come in and set up ours, or something like that. I contend that content is what keeps most of your listeners listening. You don't want to sound bad. Absolutely don't sound bad. We don't want to reflect a bad image of Christ, like, who cares? It doesn't matter what it sounds like. Sound the best you can, but at the same time, don't get into a loudness situation where you think you have to be the loudest thing on the dial, because people are listening to you because of content, not because of, wow, this guy's voice is just incredible. I just got to listen to it. So, sorry, Ron. Maybe they do for you, but everybody else.
Yeah, we're the hot station in Myrtle Beach, right?
So, yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
And again, please talk to Ben at his booth and equipment, and I'm sure they will be able to hook you guys up. So it is 10 o'clock. You have 15 minutes, and then we'll be back in for Matt with Genesis Productions. 15 minutes.